Hi guys! Today I want to have a look at the legendary Revox A77 reel-to-reel machine. Back that days it was one of the top of the line DACs you could buy for money, and even to today's standard it is a very good reel-to-reel machine. I also want to explain my love to reel-to-reel machines a little bit. So reel-to-reel, that was actually before my time. So when I grew up I was using compact cassette tapes. Nothing like a reel-to-reel machine, and only just recently, about a year or two ago, I got fascinated by these reel-to-reel machines with these big 10.5-inch reels. I think they're just looking beautiful, and I just like the idea of having something mechanically running in the background playing music instead of just having it coming from a DAC or something. But back to the A77. So the A77 was released in the year 1967. So that's quite a long time ago, and there are 4 different versions: so Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, and Mark 4. So they all look slightly different. There were not that huge differences in terms of the technology. All pretty much still the same DACs, minor improvements, probably more of an phase update than it was really a technology upgrade from year to year. The DAC I got is a Mark III DAC from somewhere between 1971 or 1974, I don't know. So that means that this DAC is probably 44 years old or older, and it's still in actually pretty good shape. But let's stay a bit with the special features of the A77, or what made it stand out. So it has 3 direct drive motors, 2 reel motors and 1 capstan motor. It has 3 heads, so that means you can have recording and monitoring at the same time. And the whole DAC is solenoid operated, so it doesn't have this old mechanical switches you see on some old reel-to-reel machines, or in my video about the TC350, where you have to turn this metal button in either direction to make the reel-to-reel DAC operate. That's something that's not necessary. That's here like a very modern DAC. Everything is electronic, whether you want to play, stop, or wind, forward, or rewind. So the DAC was available in 3.25 and 7.5 inch per second, as well as 7.5 inch and 15 inch per second. So the second one is a high-speed version, something you would find in studios. So my version is a 3.25 and 7.5 inch per second. And there were 2-track and 4-track versions available. And I want to explain a little bit then after this slide what 2-track and 4-track actually means. So from the performance, so the maximum wow and flutter was at 0.08% at 7.5 inch per second. I believe a Nakamichi Dragon would be at 0.04%. So it's pretty good. It's not that outstanding, but keep in mind how old this DAC actually is, and it's not a tape DAC, it's a reel-to-reel machine. The frequency range went from 30 Hz to 20 kHz. So we got 2 different main versions of the A77, the half-track, or we can also call it 2-track, and the 4-track. The half-track has the advantage that it has more space to store information compared to a 4-track. So more surface on the tape for the information results in an improved sound quality. And there's also a potential issue with reel-to-reel machines that can spoil a bit of the fun on 4 tracks, and that is an effect that we call crosstalk. So what can happen on the 4-track is that some bits of the recordings from the other 2 tracks, let's call it the B-side, spills over into the recording you are just listening to. Depending on the DAC that you use, that can be a minor issue, but that's certainly not an issue you have to worry about on a 2-track machine. But the disadvantage is that you only got one side on a 2-track or half-track, and you end up with less playtime. For example, a 10.5 inch reel on 7.5 inch per second gives you around 90 minutes playtime on a 2-track and 180 minutes on a 4-track machine. Another drawback is that you can't use pre-recorded reels. They are usually 4-track recordings because 4 tracks were used by the consumers at home. A 2-track is something for professional use. The 4-track is just straight the opposite, with more playtime. The ability to play pre-recorded reels, but with potentially some crosstalk and not the maximum of sound quality that you can actually get from the medium. But okay, that's enough theory, and let me introduce you to the A77 that I have recently bought. This is a boxed version of the A77 with surprisingly good sounding speakers. That the front was always covered certainly contributed to the great condition the DAC currently is in. A well-designed front panel that almost looks spotless. Above it we find this little hatch that hides switches to turn off the internal speakers and the motors. That hatch covers also the path of the tape all the way over the heads. Opening it makes it quite easy to install or remove a reel. The power switch also serves as a speed selector. You would also need to hit the play button to start playback, just like on a compact cassette tape deck. Next to it we got the selection of the input source for each channel individually, as well as record level adjustment. The VU meters can be turned off. They unfortunately only move on the A77 when you are in recording mode. The controls on the other side are well designed as well. The buttons to operate the transport are here, volume control for the internal speakers, as well as a selection of the playback mode. Most of the time it would be stereo, of course. On the back of the deck you got your RCA inputs and outputs. The power connector is a bit special. A lot of people replace it with the type you would find in an ATX power supply. It's a bit hard to source these original Revox cables. My deck luckily came with it. Also a bit special is the remote control plug. If you don't have this blind plug, your A77 would not do much. So if you ever buy an A77, you better make sure it is in its place. I bought this deck broken and it came with a bunch of spare parts, even with some new boards and a full restoration kit. The restoration kit is really awesome. The back had 3 times the contents when I got it, but these are the leftovers as I have only completed probably 50% of the restoration. In the back are these motor capacitors, as well as all kinds of other types of capacitors. And another source of trouble are these small potentiometers, and you got also a full set of them as part of the kit. The whole kit is from Nagravox, and it's made here in Australia. It's the only kit with decent motor capacitors. What's even better is that this kit comes with instructions in PDF format. This document is 117 pages long. You get even soldering tips and step-by-step instructions with pictures how you get your Revox deck back in shape. Here you can see before and after pictures, and that was the issue my A77 was actually facing. There was a problem with the speed control, and after swapping out the old capacitors with new capacitors as instructed here, my deck was working again. Here's an example of troubleshooting tips, and there are plenty of them in here. Also diagrams are included and a lot of additional information about disassembly, reassembly, things you should do and things you shouldn't do. I must say that the incredible amount of detail and the extent of the instructions really blew me away. I've never seen anything like that before, and I can highly recommend these Nagravox kits. The way these Revox decks were built was well ahead of their time. Every functionality is on its own circuit board, which can be unplugged and easily serviced. Almost like a PC with different PCI cards. If you are not keen servicing the different circuit boards on your own, you can buy them already restored on eBay. And this is a side-by-side comparison of a new one from eBay and a not serviced one out of my A77. Okay, I also want to demonstrate how the restoration process works for each of the circuit boards. So what we want to do now is we want to restore the playback amplifier. So every Revox A77 got 2 of them, so for each channel, left and right, there's one. And you can see here already on the right page of this excellent manual that came together with your Nagravox restoration kit, that there are even pictures how the circuit board looks before you start restoring it and how it should look once you are done with it. And it definitely 100% looks like the one I just pulled out of my A77. And there's also a table which is above these 2 images, which gives you an idea which kind of capacitors should go into which place. Some of them are slightly different, but that's not a problem. And you can also see here that there is a quantity column which says 2 PCBs. This is why we have, for example, 4 803 capacitors, but in reality we would only use 2 to replace this big one. And you can see that this big capacitor is a 1600 microfarad 3-volt capacitor. We will replace it with 2 3300 6.3 volt capacitors, and there are even some notes because this is a bit unusual. There are 2 3300 microfarads that will be switched into series, and you can see that then here on the picture as a result how that will look once we will be finished with that. Another thing that has also been replaced is the potentiometer here. So this board only has one, and they also known to have to develop sometimes some issues, and it definitely makes sense to replace them. So with these manual, we will just go ahead and we'll start to restore the first playback amplifier of my A77. Okay, so here we are. This is the record amplifier out of my A77. So it looks basically exactly like the one that we had in the picture. It's probably in the manual the other way around. The only difference is that this capacitor is a different kind of type that was used. It's probably slightly different from year to year, but the numbers, the specification matches roughly up. So it's a 22 microfarad and 40 volt capacitor. And this type of capacitor is actually well known for causing trouble, so that's definitely one we want to replace. And also this small capacitor here in the corner, even though it's not an electrolytic capacitor, in the restoration we will replace all of them with electrolytic capacitors. Why that is a good idea is actually explained in the manual, so for those who might be concerned about this. Okay, so to get started, I heated already up my soldering iron. And yeah, we just go about it and try to take out the first one here and replace it with a new one. And for that we will have to search a bit through the huge bag of capacitors to get to the one that we need as a replacement. So that's a little challenge in itself, but let's just do this. So here we got number 1. And we also want to get the big fella here. There's not really a lot of special equipment or anything required. You also need to use the suction pump to get rid of the solder or anything. Just heat it up and pull gently and you should be able to remove it. Okay, so here we go. And this is number 2, the 2240 volt other capacitor. So our job will be now to look for replacements. According to the manual, what we will require for C814 in the corner is a 10 microfarad 50 volt, and 813 right next to it will be a 22 microfarad 50 volt. Okay, so let's get through that back and hopefully I can find them quickly. Ah, that's a 22. Okay, so we got 10 and 22. Let me hold that again into the camera. Not sure if my camera is focusing. So that's all we need for the moment as a replacement. Oh, we got the old ones here. I just put them here into the corner. And I also want to check if the old ones are still all right, or if they definitely had an issue. Just interesting to know. What we need to be sure about is the polarity. So capacitors are electronic parts that need to go into the circuit board with the correct polarity. So we can't mix up a negative and positive. Again, the instruction manual is helping us. Don't get confused. So in a capacitor, the negative pole is marked and not the positive one. You can see that on this big minus here. So that's a negative, and looking at the manual, we know that it has to go in, for example, this way. So for this capacitor, it has to be C814, which is a 10 microfarad. So the one I'm holding here in my hand is a 10 microfarad. So again, it has to go in that way. So let's do that. Let's remove a little bit of the remaining solder from the board, and then we should be able to solder in the new capacitor. So there's a little bit too much solder, and actually I have to use a suction pump. Let's do that again. That looks alright. So we should be able to solder the 10 microfarad capacitor back in. So let's flip that around. Again, negative needs to go to the inside. Just push these wires through. Bend it a little bit over. And with a little bit of solder, we will get that mounted again to the circuit board. Here we go. So that's number one. And then we still got our 22 microfarad, which is this one here. They also need to go back into place. Again, checking the manual. Positive is pointing towards the potentiometer, so negative needs to go then onto the other side. I just put that there in as well. Bend the little wires a little bit. And solder it just back on. That's basically it. Now we just need to get rid of the excess wire. It's a very easy job. All right, and here we go. So we got two of these capacitors of this playback amplifier already replaced. Awesome. And that's then basically how it continues, and you have to go through all of these capacitors. And the potentiometer, what is a bit tricky with the potentiometer, it has a certain setting, a certain an ohm value, and so what you need to do is you need to check the manual and also measure with a voltmeter how many ohms the potentiometer actually got in its current setting, and you need to replicate that on the new one that you are inserting into the circuit board. What I really like is one of these transistor testers. It's something you can find for $10 or $15 on eBay. these are really smart devices, and they figure out themselves what kind of device you're trying to test, whether it's a resistor, a capacitor, or a transistor or something. And that makes the whole process of testing if something is broken or not just a whole lot easier. So what we want to do is we want to figure out what is the capacity of this 22 microfarad capacitor here, and if that is still close and functioning, or if it's far off, just out of curiosity, how well this one survived. So for that we just need to hook that up. Need to press a button, and the device figures out that this is actually a capacitor, and it will tell us what is the actual capacity and the inner resistance, the ESR value. 1.8 ohm is a little bit high, I believe, and instead of 22 microfarad we got 32.59, so it definitely doesn't have the original value anymore. It's not anywhere close. I doubt that would have been enough to cause an issue, but that way we know that definitely it was worthwhile a part to be replaced from the original machine. You can also test this one as well. In this case you don't have any polarity because it's not an electrolytic capacitor. So let's see how that works out. That takes really long. Damaged part. So not sure if this is beyond the capability of this device, because it's a very small 3.3 microfarad capacitor, or if it's really broken. Alright, so that's the process. And here it is, the A77 in its full glory. Playback through its internal speakers at the moment. I will go in all detail through its functions, but we'll leave that for a separate video, as this one got already pretty long. I hope you enjoyed this little trip into the world of reel-to-reels, and as usual, thanks for watching.